Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about value. This is a follow-up to the review I made on this sword right here, which is the Mateusz Sulowski big type 14, 16 something that I mentioned was $3,000, and I described it as a great value. Now, a slight correction, I believe it's 3,000 euros is actually what it costs, which is a little bit more than $3,000, but that changes not really a whole lot. It's close enough, at least at the time of filming, to say that I would still put it in the great value category. And why is that? Why do I describe this as a great value when it is over $3,000? Well, I say it's handmade, which I think to me has some value. It's made by a competent person that achieves some dynamic, interesting, fun feeling in the sword. It also has a lot of detail on it, which you don't necessarily see in a lot of items that are handmade, and that detail is really quite good. It's quite refined. Things are crisp and nipped and tucked, I should say, in a way that is intricate and quite lovely. So those things to me are a great value at $3,000. Can you get them for less money, I suppose, is the question. When I say it's a good value, to me, that means I feel like my money is going a long way, that I'm getting my money's worth for that or more than that. So why do I think that? Well, I have some other smatterings of swords here, and I think value is an important thing to talk about, because I did get a lot of feedback on that video that, well, the sword isn't perfect. How can it be worth $3,000 if it's not perfect? The sword, any sword that's over $1,000 or $100, whatever your budget happens to be, is too much money. It couldn't possibly justify the price. And on a personal level, that may be entirely true. Your budget may not allow for a $3,000 sword. It might as well be the moon, and you can't justify it. And that's totally fine. There are a lot of offerings for less money than that are also great values. But I would challenge you to say that it's tough to find a sword that does all of the things that sword does for the money. And I have a small smattering of samples here to kind of go through. So I'm going to reach around my samples here, and just talk about some of the things that I see on the market. So starting with the bottom here, I think this is a sword from Sordar. I haven't gotten a chance to review it yet, and it is a long sword and is like 150 bucks. And the reason I'm pulling these out is I have positive things to say about every sword in this listing. And I would describe all of the things that I'm going to show you here as decent values, probably. But this, it doesn't feel dumb. I mean, it's a little clunky in the hand, but it's also a very big sword. I haven't gotten a chance to review it yet, but this can be had for 150 bucks, probably-ish. Don't quote me on the price exactly, but I think it's like 140 online. I don't think that necessarily includes shipping. And generally speaking, it's pretty well done. The things I'm pedantic and complain about are generally pretty well nipped and tucked, and it can be had for $140. But what do we see here? Well, one, it's a Chinese-made blade, and it's a mass production sword, so it doesn't have that kind of handmade smith of note who you know is studied and refined his craft. It doesn't have quite the same things. Obviously, you're not spending $3,000. The materials are cheaper. I really can't compare these two things, but you can absolutely get a sword that feels good in your hand for 150 bucks. So you don't need to spend $3,000 to get that. But shape aside, because that sword for $3,000 has a pretty unique shape that I don't see well represented in the market. If you don't really care about that, you can absolutely get a sword that is decent, that is long, that is going to function as a sword for 150 bucks. So I would say that this is also a great value, but it doesn't have the kind of handmade smith of note feeling to it. It doesn't have the stand up and don't tip over. It does actually have that, apparently. It doesn't have the handmade smith of note kind of thing. It doesn't have the same detailing in it. It doesn't have the same sense of refinement. I'm not expecting it to. It could still be a great value at 150 bucks without those things. This is another one from Sordar. What we have here is a Damascus-y pattern blade. So I can get a blade with folded steel. This one feels a little bit more refined, a little bit more nimble in the hand. I actually have done a review on this one, and while it is not a perfect sword, I would say, again, a pretty solid value. I think that this one, I can't even remember how much it is, but it's a far cry from $3,000 and a step up from this one here. At the same time, you can get a perfectly fine sword for well less than $3,000. I've probably enunciated on that point enough, but both of these swords are relatively simple pieces. If I get into something just a little bit more complicated as I work my way up. Well, here I got a Balor arm sword. This is one of the European swords that I would say gave me a great impression for value. I don't generally like this style of sword. Most of the examples. I even went to Cultivathena and saw one of these in person that did not have a scabbard that stuck, but this sword feels absolutely delightful in the hand. It moves really, really well, and many of the other swords from the Balor Arms line that were subsequently produced by LK Chen also feel really, really good in the hands. And these are $400. Now, you don't have the same detailing on the scabbard, but you do have some level of detail. You have a sword, again, that feels nipped and tucked beyond its value. And for $400, you can get something that feels absolutely delightful in the hand, but you don't necessarily get something that's handmade. As refined as that sword, it isn't as nipped and tucked along the blade. The flats and whatnot are not as clean. The work on the guard is not as ornate. It's also not handmade. These pieces are cast, regardless of how much handwork may have gone into the blade. There is a level of handwork, obviously, on these swords, but it's not necessarily to the same degree as this one is. Is that important to you? Do you want to pay for it? Those are decisions that you have to make. But I'm going over some more things for value here. This is another sword, recently came to me from Ronin Katana. These are $320. And what do you get here? Well, you get a very, very long sword, one, but you get a hilt that is somewhat unique. It's a little Lord of the Ringsy to me, but obviously a cast piece, cast pommel. But you get a wire grip here. You get something that has a little bit of flair to it, and you can have it for $325. And it feels nice, and it's quite long and reasonably pretty looking. There are a number of options available to you that are not garbage, and it's a great time to be interested in the hobby. I'm pulling out things that I generally enjoy here as well. I don't really have any shit to talk about any of these swords. Another one that I just recently reviewed is from the Royal Armories collection. These are based off of historic museum pieces. So Matt Easton is working with Windlass and the Royal Armories in this collaboration to reproduce things that are in their collection. This is a delightful feeling sword, reasonably faithfully reproduced, and it is magic, and it is $500. Now, you get a lot. You get a reasonably detailed handle, reasonably detailed crossguard, simple, I guess, overall, but not necessarily a grotesque difference between this and the other sword for $3,000. This is a faceted pommel. The $3,000 sword has a faceted pommel. This has a crossguard with some dimension and taper. That one has a more elaborate crossguard. This has a relatively, it's a simple looking blade, but it's got actually some nuance and complexity to it. Comes with a scabbard that does not feel like hot garbage. It's not actually as refined and nice though, but it is $500. And all of these swords that I've just shown you here are examples of swords that you can have for under $500 at this point. Well, maybe not with shipping, but round about that. And they're great swords. They're great values. It doesn't mean that this one is not a great value. What does this have that those don't? Well, first, an immense amount of hand detailing. The quality of materials is different, and the blade is handmade and forged. And this one, despite being relatively large, is also really surprisingly light in the hand. It's really made by a person that has refined that shape, that really knows what they're doing. Some of these have varying degrees of good, but all of them actually feel pretty good in the hand. I'd still say that one feels a surprising amount better. But let's step up to something a little nicer. Maybe you're not thinking, well, $500 is the thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about if I spend $1,000. Well, here is an Albian Knight. This, I think, would be an $800 sword. But well, no, it's not $800 anymore. It's over $1,000 now, inflation. Anyway, the point is, this sword doesn't come with a scabbard. You then have to go acquire one. Hopefully you can. There are a few different makers out there that make swords that fit Albion style scabbards. I was able to find this one at a reasonable price, but the total package for this simple sword is I think $1,600 something by the time it's all done. But I couldn't just order it with a scabbard. There's also a pretty hefty weight on it. And these are great swords. They feel really nice. Albion, I think, used to be the only option to get a sword that felt nice and moved well. Well, I don't know about the only option, but you didn't used to be able to buy these, or there wasn't as much competition that you could put in your hand for $500, about half the price of an Albion, without a scabbard. So the museum replica sword, for example, feels, I think, more fun in the hand than the Albian Knight. If you ask me which one do I like more, I actually like the museum replicas or Royal Armories line from Windlass. I like that single-handed arming sword more than I like this one. It might be because I'm just not a fan of wheel pommels. The scabbard is undoubtedly nicer than this, but it's not a fair comparison. This is a much more expensive sword. It is a little cleaner and nicer. I like the shape on the Windlass piece better. but I like the fitment and alignment of all the things a little better on the Albian. The scabbard is obviously very nice, but this is a custom-made scabbard, which would cost, probably $600-700, which I think is still a great value. This seems like overall a solid value, but it's just not the same as the $3,000 sword. Now I have a few other custom pieces to kind of talk about here. This is a Landsknecht Emporium piece. It was probably around $1,200-ish, I think, to get all the custom little fitments on here. More or less, you have a $500 style blade, maybe $600 or something like that. I don't exactly recall what they charge for this style of blade, but then there was a lot of hand detailing done on this, along with some antler scales and things like that, that knocked the price up to about $1,200 by the time it was all said and done, if you wanted something like this. And it is a delightful feeling sword. Now we're in this kind of semi-custom territory, but I have a sword here that feels like somebody really knew what they were doing when they made it. It feels like it was just meant to fit in my hand. It feels sturdy and reliable and good. And I know the folks that made it. I like them. I don't know. It's overall a very special sword, but it's got a little customization to it. But this was still $1,200 something. What is the difference? Obviously, there's a pretty substantial price difference. Well, there's obviously an enormous amount of difference. That's a much larger sword. It's a much more elaborate scabbard. This has a hard to work with material, but the leather working on the handle is obviously much different. The file working on all of this guard is really nice, but it's not as refined as on the $3,000 sword, and it's just fundamentally a different shape. But still, I would describe all of these as good values. This was as well a solid value in its non-customized format as well. It's an even better value. If you don't care about all the hand detailing, which I happen to really like on this one, you can have it for much less money. Right here is an example of the Arms & Armor Schloss. Nathan from Arms & Armor recently talked about the Schloss on his channel, or on the Arms & Armor channel. This is an older version of the Schloss. I can't remember exactly what they charge for this thing, but I want to say it's over $1,000. And it is, again, reproducing one of Jord Oakeshot's kind of favorite-ish swords, or one that was mentioned by him and part of the Oakeshott collection that is now at the Oakeshott Institute, and faithfully reproduced by Arms & Armor. It has a lot of the same feeling and spirit that the original did, and it still is like $1,000, but you don't get a scabbard with it, which is why I'm using this little like shipping container thing to hold it in. So for $1,000, I get still faithfully recreated but recast handles. They're not they're not hand ground and hand twisted like they were. The blade, I believe, is forged out. And it's reproducing a museum piece, but there's not a lot of intricate detailing and whatnot on here. And if I'd imagine you can pay Arms & Armor to do more of it, but I have no idea how much it would cost you to get something as elaborate as the Mateusz Sulowski piece done on a sword like this. Now I have one other sword. This is the only European sword in my collection that exceeds the cost of the Mateusz Sulowski piece. This is a piece made by John Lindemo. It's the St. Catherine blade. It has engravings or etchings in here that are recessed in the blade. It's made out of a folded steel. It feels absolutely delightful in the hand. I believe all of the fittings and all of that are kind of custom made. Now this was over $5,000, I think 20 years ago. This is a very, very expensive sword. Is this better? Well, there are some details on here. I've got some risers and whatnot in the scabbard, but the scabbard fundamentally is thicker and less refined than on the Mateusz Sulowski piece. John Lindemo may have come a long way in 20 years, but this particular one is not a bad scabbard, but it is pretty thick. I like the handmade furniture. It's also stuck on there really well. It's a very nice scabbard, but it doesn't have the same level of detail and refinement for $5,000 that this one, $5,000 20 years ago, that this one does. 20 years ago, maybe too long. But still, I've had it for a while. I know it's over 10 years old. I think it's closer to 20. What I see is also a lot of detail in the faceting, a ton of detail in the leather work, and a blade that just is imposing and giant and also feels really dainty and delicate. The grind work is also really smooth and lovely. Everything is really nipped and tucked on here. Now, can you find other swords for less money? Absolutely. Can you find other values for less money? Absolutely. But I don't think that changes my mind on this sword being a great value. You get, again, an incredibly detailed sword. Both the scabbard, the handle, the belt, the blade, There's facets, and just every angle of this offers you something to appreciate in terms of the handiwork and craftsmanship that went into it. And that to me seems well worth the $3,000 asking price, or 3,200, whatever it works out to if it was 3,000 euros. I think this package comes out to be a lot, and you get it from one dude who executes it. You know that competency is in every area of the sword, and that you also don't have to wait in line for another year for a scabbard maker or something like that. It comes to you in one package. There's a little bit of convenience there as well for the price, which I guess you might hope there would be, but isn't necessarily always the case. Other people that make really high-end swords absolutely can charge more than $3,000. So I would, to the folks out there that say that this isn't a good value, that's fine. If it's out of your budget, that's one thing. But if you say that it's a bad deal or too much money for what's offered here, I would challenge you to find something better for less. And I'd throw it in the commentary down below. I could be entirely wrong. If you see this reproduced elsewhere at the same level of quality or even close to for less, throw me a link in the description down below. It'd be fun to see. But I have looked and I can't find anything that offers you necessarily the same shape or just the same quality. I struggle to find anything that does anywhere close to this kind of work for $3,000, let alone all of the detailing and precision that I see elsewhere. So anyway, could be wrong on that, but those are my thoughts. Just some noodling on value, because everyone's entitled to their opinion. If you don't think it's a deal for you, that's fine. But I do think you get a fair amount of sword for your money, a fair amount of hand time and skill, and a quality craftsman that knows what they're doing, really putting their heart and soul into something and giving you all the benefits of the knowledge they've accumulated over the years and through a lot of trial and error in your hand. And that's what I feel in this piece. That's what I think you're getting for $3,000-ish. I know it's not $3,000, a little more than $3,000. So anyway, those are my thoughts. If you are one of the folks that said this sword is unequivocally not worth $3,000, who would pay that ludicrous amount of money? What are you expecting for that amount of money? What would be fair? What should it or shouldn't it do for $3,000? Why? Is it that you would never spend that much on a sword, which is totally fair? I don't expect you to. Is it that you can get a sword that satiates all your needs for less money? What does this not do, or should it do, to justify its price in your mind? To me, I think it really gives you a lot, because I struggle. I look at this sword for $5,000, and while it has some folded steel, which is pretty neat, I look at this as probably a superior blade to that one there, and it's $3,000 in today's money versus $5,000 in 20 years ago money, which would be more now. Anyway, I digress. Those are my thoughts. I'm interested to hear yours. This is a little bit of a conversation. I'm curious. Hopefully the analogy was helpful. This wasn't just a show and tell session. Hopefully the examples that I brought out conveyed the point that there's a lot of good values out there. This just happens to be one that elevates on all fronts, and why I believe it's worth it. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I've prattled on long enough. Cheers, and thanks for watching. Putting stuff away, I forgot to mention that this is also more than $3,000. This is an Albian Conan, and I don't know why I had it out here and I didn't even mention it. This sword is over $3,000, and the furniture is cast, and it's from the Conan movie, and it's super cool, but it's also an awful feeling sword. But today you can go and buy this sword, and it costs more than $3,000, and you get this awesome wooden box, but you don't get a scabbard for it, and you also don't get a sword that feels good in the hand, and you also don't get a sword that is intricately detailed. Arguably, you do get a sword that is more awesome, but it is not. It is more money than the other sword. And which one would I rather have, wear around? Which one would I get more use out of? Probably the Mateusz Sulowski, in all honesty. Which one would I rather look at hanging on my wall is maybe a little difficult. This one holds a special sentimental place for obvious reasons, but the Mateusz Sulowski sword is unquestionably a more fun sword to move around if you are planning on doing any sword-related things and you are not Conan the Barbarian. Herpety derp, definitely should have put this one in there. Cheers.